Hello, I'm Greenwood and welcome to my studio. This video will go into a little bit more detail about forging sterling silver wires, the styles of hammers that we'll be using for forging, and also what we can do with these wires, taking them from boring, square, and round wires to more three-dimensional forms with much more visual interest. We'll be forging these wires flat, forging them to a single reverse, a double reverse, and multiple reverses. Also, I'll be showing you examples of jewelry using these types of reverses so you can see how the forged wires are integrated into a jewelry design. We're going to have lots of fun doing this, so why don't we get started? This is the sterling silver wire that we'll be using for forging. There's square wire and there's round wire. Those are the most two common wires. Let's take a look at those wires a little bit closer so you can see the gauges or the sizes of them compared to a penny. This is a forging hammer, 2-pound forging hammer. Has the two faces on it, the flat peen and the cross peen. And I also have a smaller forging hammer with the same type of peens on it, and we'll be introducing you to a planishing hammer. This is one that will take a lot of the marks out of the wire and smooth it out. It's very important that we understand what happens to these sterling silver wires when we start forging on them. Each of the hammers will affect the wires differently, and with the forging hammer with a flat peen, the molecules will spread evenly in all different directions. If we use the cross peen, the molecules will generally move in the direction of the handle. They'll be moving this way and this way, so, and not very much to the side. So if we want to spread a wire a little bit thicker, we can use this cross peen across the wire or with the wire, and it will make the wire fatter. So spread evenly with the flat peen, and the cross peen, we can control the spread and it will move in the direction of the handle. With the planishing hammer, it's basically the same thing, only there's no cross peen on the planishing hammer. So when we start hammering on the wires with the slightly domed surface, all those molecules will still work in all different directions. They'll spread evenly. And with the flat peen, it will be the same thing because we'll be working on a kind of a curved wire so we don't hit the edges, and it will spread evenly also. Before we do any forging on any silver wire, we want to make sure that it's fully prepared. And to help this process along, we're going to anneal the metal. We're going to heat it up with an acetylene air torch to a dull cherry red color. This is the temperature with silver that the molecules are bumping into each other and they spread far apart. Because they're bumping into each other, they get a little bit further apart and the metal becomes softer. So with heating it up to that dull cherry red, we'll bring it right up to that temperature, and that's right before the metal starts melting. So we're going to cut the temperature right at that time, and the molecules will stay far apart and the metal will become softer for us to either forge on it, to bend on it, to do any working on the metal. So let's go through this process. We'll heat it up with the acetylene air torch and we'll bring it up to that dull cherry red. Here's our sterling silver wire in a bed of pumice. Pumice is a volcanic rock that helps us hold pieces for annealing. It reflects the heat back onto the metal without absorbing a lot of the heat. So let's heat this wire up to a dull cherry red color. We're going to be using our acetylene and air torch, and we'll just go along the wire and we can heat it up to the dull cherry red color and then move on. The whole wire does not have to be heated all at once. It's real important that you keep an eye on that metal and make sure that it's just a dull red. We do not want a bright red because that's getting higher than the annealing temperature, which is about 1100 to 1200 degrees for sterling silver wire, and we don't want to go over that because then it'll get close to the melting temperature of the wire. So we want to heat it up to a dull cherry red color and keep a real close eye on that. I don't want to turn off the lights because it makes the wire look a lot hotter or a lot brighter than what it is. And I want you to get used to taking a look at the wire under normal lighting conditions. So we'll just bring it up to that bright, dull cherry red without bringing it to a bright color. And just move along and we'll anneal that wire. So there we go. During the annealing process, the sterling silver wires will oxidize. They'll turn dark gray or black. So we want to make sure that we get those oxides off of there. So the easiest way to do that is to put them in a pickling solution or an acid solution. The acid solution that I'm using, which is a little bit safer, is a combination of vinegar and citric acid. I get the citric acid just at the grocery store. It's used in the canning process. So I've used a mixture of that, and I've used my famous crock pot to heat it up, and because it does work better when it's warm. So when you put the sterling silver wires in the pickling solution, they'll turn white instead of that dark gray or black. So it still has some acid on here, so I want to neutralize that acid and then rinse it off. So I'll put it in a mixture of baking soda and water, and then put it in pure water and rinse it off, and we're all set. So there we have the sterling silver nice and bright and clean and ready for forging. Now that we have our sterling silver wires annealed and prepared for forging, now that they're nice and soft, we want to make sure that the ends are nice and smooth so they don't split and crack when we start hammering on them and forging them. So we can do this simply by filing them. We can use a flat file, and you can hold it in your hands and start filing. And remember, when you do file and you want to take the file and push away from you, the teeth only work in one direction. So you can do it freehand up in the air. You can put the wire on a bench pin and start filing this way, or you can use a neat little tool. It's called a ring clamp. This is a ring clamp. It's two pieces of wood with a hinge in the middle and some leather at both ends to soften the holding of the sterling silver so it doesn't mark it. And then you have a wedge, and you simply take your wire and put it in the end of the ring clamp. Hold it down so it doesn't fall out, and then simply slide the wedge into the slot at the other end. And I like to take it on the bench and give it a little tap, and this will hold this nice and tight for you. And so then you can start filing on your bench pin. And remember again that the file only works in one direction, and that will file those down nice and smooth so they don't split while you're forging. Let's start off with a forged wire that is flat only on one side. So instead of just taking a flat straight wire, I'd like to put a few curves in. It gives it a little bit more interest when we just forge it flat. So I'm going to take my pliers here that have some nylon tips on them, and take this wire and bend it into kind of a S shape. Now that I have the wire bent in an S shape, I'm simply going to forge it flat with the flat peen on the forging hammer. I'm going to be using the anvil, and we'll just hammer the wire flat. So this is a flat single pane forge. Remember on our other video we were using the cross peen. This is a little bit smaller wire here, so it makes it more difficult to forge using the cross peen. So I'm just going to use the flat peen on this one. So now we've got this side forged flat, and I'm going to forge the rest of it flat. I'm overlapping my hammer blows, and then I'm lightening my hammer blows as I get toward the end, and this smooths the wires out. So now we have our S-shape forged flat. We're going to be taking this wire and forging it into a single reverse. We'll forge it on this side and then flip it on over, and we'll reverse the planes and do a single reverse. So this is a little bit narrower wire here, so I'm just going to forge the wire with the flat peen and then switch over to the cross peen and get a little bit wider using the cross peen. The cross peen is, we can use this to our advantage because the wire will only move in the direction of the handle with the cross peen. So I can widen these wires without making them longer. So we'll use the cross peen and make it nice and wide. I want to flip it over. Same thing on the back. Keep my hammer blows in the middle of the wire so it'll forge out evenly on both sides, and then I can flip it on over and planish it out with the flat peen. Do the same thing on the other side. So now we have a single reverse or a simple reversed forged wire. Our next wire, we want to do a double reverse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten the two ends first, and then I'm going to bend it and then forge the other section in the middle. So let's do the two ends first. Flip it over. Use my flat peen to planish the hammer marks out. Flip it over. I'm going to forge on the exact same side, only at the opposite end of the wire. Use my cross peen. Forge it wider. Okay, now I have the two ends forged on the same plane. So what I want to do is I want to forge in the middle section here on the opposite plane, so then the plane will reverse. So I can either go ahead and forge it here in the middle so it's flat, and then I could bend it, or I could bend it around a T-stake or a mandrel and forge it flat. But let's go ahead and forge it right here on the anvil. Now this wire is getting pretty small for this 2-pound forging hammer, so why don't I switch to a little bit smaller forging hammer, and that way I can get into the middle a little bit easier here. Use the cross peen, make the wire wider, flip it over, make sure it gets flat down against the anvil. Planish those marks out. That planishing is just simply using the flat peen, and that removes the cross peen marks in the wire. So now we have a double reversed wire. Now with this wire, we're going to do a double reverse, only instead of going ahead and forging it flat this way, in the middle, what we're going to do is we're going to forge the two ends, and then we'll bend it and then forge in the opposite plane. So let's do the two ends first. Planish the hammer marks out, make it smooth. We'll be doing a little bit more planishing later with a planishing hammer too. So we'll get the basic form laid out here first. Okay, now we have the two planes forged on the same plane, only on opposite sides of the wire. Now let's take and bend this wire so we can forge the curve. Now let's forge this section here of the wire, and it will make it much more three-dimensional. So let's try that. Now I can take my forging hammer and just forge it with the flat face. This will make it wider here, but it won't make it quite as wide, and also bring it more to a point. So what I want to do is I'm going to start hammering across the end of the curve here with my cross peen, and this will force the molecules in that wire to spread out wider, and I'm kind of favoring more of the tip of the wire, or of that bend. Overlap my hammer blows, taper it up toward the ends, and then there we have a double reversed wire. Now that the sterling silver wires have been forged and put into the shapes, we want to make sure that the surfaces are as smooth as possible, if that's what you're going for, is a smooth surface. With the hammers in the forging process, it does leave some marks on the metal. So what we want to do is we would like to get rid of those hammer marks, and believe it or not, we can get rid of hammer marks using a hammer. So we want to use this hammer right here. This is called a planishing hammer, and this has a slightly domed surface on this end, and the other end is a flat surface. We use the flat surfaces when we're hammering over curved wires. In this case it's flat, so we're going to use the slightly curved or slightly domed surface and start hammering on the wires and overlapping our hammer blows, and gently start smoothing the metal out. So let's take it and start hammering on it and overlapping our hammer blows. Taking this very gently, and you can see the hammer blows that you're putting on the metal. If you start hammering too hard, then you'll really see some big marks in it. So we're just going to overlap the hammer blows very slightly and do a gentle hammering on the wire. Notice the surface that I'm working on is a real highly mirror finished piece of steel. This is actually just a simple railroad track piece. I've taken it, ground it down, filed it, emery clothed it, and buffed it up to a nice high mirror finish. You want to make sure that you are using that especially with your mirror finished planishing hammers. So when you start hammering, you're not picking up the marks off, like for example the anvil, which is a little bit tougher and rougher. So you can use any piece of steel that has a nice smooth mirror finish to it. The smoother it is, the better off it's going to be. And so you can pick up bench plates that are nice and smooth and have a nice mirror finish to them, and then you can do your planishing on those. I've used this over the years, and I've simply enjoyed using the recycled railroad track. So plus you spend a lot of hours getting it nice and polished, so you want to make sure you use it. So you can use the tops of tea stakes or polished part on the anvil, or any piece of metal that you can smooth down and polish. So we'll simply just take and start finishing off these wires and smoothing them down with the hammer. So let's take that double reversed wire. We can do the same thing. Just start planishing on it and overlapping the hammer blows, smoothing them out. Now, if you have a little misshapen wire for your jewelry project, you may want to file the edges. That will make them nice and smooth, and then you can emery them down using your buff sticks or your emery sticks and getting those areas nice and smooth. So I'd like to take this guy. Remember the other double reverse that we did, where we forged on the two ends and then we bent it and flattened it? This one we forged on the two ends and then forged in the middle. So what we can do is we can actually bend this one with that forge where this one was against it. Now remember, when you start hammering on wire and forging wire, it'll start work hardening, and so that means that the molecules from the annealing process, when we made them spread apart and get further apart and soft, with the hammering on the metal, it will work harden it. So now for me to try to bend this wire here, it's really stiff, and I'm not going to do a successful job of bending it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to anneal this wire, and then we'll go ahead and bend it, and you'll see how easy it is. Real tough now. We're going to anneal it, and then I'll bend it again. Now that I have this sterling silver wire annealed, it's nice and soft now, I can bend it around the mandrel. I'm going to be bending it around my ring mandrel. This is my ring mandrel here, and I just simply stick it into a hole in my bench. That holds it for me. I can lean up against it, makes it nice and firm. So I'll take this wire and start wrapping it around the mandrel. Simply bend it over it. It's nice and soft because it has been annealed. So I bend it a little bit tighter. And now I have that double reverse again. That's the exact opposite of this one right here. And so those are the double reverses. Now that we have our wires forged, and in this particular one it's the flat plane that hasn't got any reverses on it, we can actually start making some more visual interest to the wires by adding textures to it. So you can add textures by an infinite amount of tools. You can use hammers, you can use files, you can use chasing tools, you can use burrs, anything that you can do to put texture on it. But while we have this up on our railroad track, let's put on a few hammer textures. So we can use one of these hammers right here. This is called a chasing hammer, and it has a little round peen to it. So you can simply take that and start hammering on the wire, and this will leave a little tiny round mark on the metal, and it's kind of a nice pleasing texture. Any other type of hammers that you can use. This is another metalsmithing hammer. It's got a little bit smoother peen to it. We can start and put that texture on. That's a little bit broader mark instead of the little round marks to it. Or we can go to something a little bit more drastic, and this is a riveting hammer. This is one of my favorite tools right here, and it's got a nice sharp peen to it and used for working rivets, but I use it for a lot of texture. So I'm going to put some texture on this one using the cross peen and start putting a heavy line texture on that piece of metal. Here we have the texture used with the chasing hammer. This is the metalsmithing hammer, raising hammer, and then this is the riveting hammer here. So you can see you can put a wide variety of textures on your wire just simply by hammering on them. So they make a pretty cool texture and will add visual interest to your jewelry. This is an example of a sterling silver forged wire necklace that has several of the different types of reverses in it that we've been talking about. Let's zoom in on the flat wire first. This does not have any reverses to it, it's only flat. Then we'll go down to the bottom of the necklace and look at the single reverse. This wire has been split with a jeweler's saw, but it's still a single reverse. Then there's two double reverses above that, and then two multiple reverses. This is a good example of a necklace that has used several of the different types of reverses in one intricate design. This hairpiece is an example of a multiple forged wire. It's one wire that's been forged on multiple reverses, and it has a forged wire pin running through it to hold it to the hair. This is about 3 inches long. This hairpiece has several forged wires that are double reverses. It also has a forged wire to hold it to the hair. This is about 2 inches long. Here's a pendant with several multiple reversed wires with acrylic. It's about 2.5 inches long. As you can see, there are lots of things that we can do to sterling silver wires to make them more visually interesting. Feel free to use any of these techniques in your own jewelry, and also keep your eyes open for other pieces of jewelry that have used these techniques and see if you can identify them. The whole idea behind jewelry design is to make your pieces much more visually interesting. Don't just hammer the wires flat or leave them square or round. Forge them. Make them much more exciting and pleasing to look at by giving them that three-dimensional quality. It's a lot more fun to work on the pieces of jewelry that are exciting, and you're going to really enjoy yourself. If you've enjoyed this video and learned something, make sure that you click the likes below. And also, if you haven't subscribed, make sure that you do subscribe, because there's going to be more videos coming, and I think that you'll really enjoy them. Looking forward to seeing you. We'll see you then.